Hey guys, so I just heard on the news that the recent mass shooter, uh, he had said that he was being followed and that people were hacking his computer and so on. And of course, they're calling him paranoid and mentally ill. This is going to get bad, folks. Here we go. All right, it's getting worse, and it's going to keep getting worse. And those of you who've read the Bible, you know what the outcome is. So first of all, let's talk about, for a moment, stigmatizing the mentally ill. This doesn't just, create a bad situation for targets of organized stalking. It creates a bad situation for people who genuinely do suffer from legitimate mental illness. Why? Because what they're doing is they're connecting mental illness with extreme acts of violence. Okay, they're creating an association, in the minds of the masses, between the two. So what happens? On one hand, they'll tell you there's nothing wrong with, we shouldn't stigmatize mental illness, and that there's nothing wrong with needing help, and that you should reach out to people, right? No pressure, no stigma. On the other hand, they're literally associating mental illness with violence every time, not every time, but in this case, in a lot of other cases as well, someone goes on a violent shooting spree, right away they call him mentally ill. They said it happened because of mental illness. They're literally, I would think that human rights activists would see the danger in this, right? You're taking a whole group of people who suffer from it can be any range of mental illnesses, any mental illness. And you're creating around them this suspicion almost. Okay, you're setting them up to be mistreated. You're setting them up to be treated differently, especially and yet you're still saying, people, if they need help, should get help. They should report it. They should call someone. They shouldn't be afraid to reach out for help. No stigma. Well, there is a stigma if you continue to try to connect this to violence. That creates a stigma. What happens? What happens then, right? Well, if someone is truly mentally ill, or if they're just deemed mentally ill, at this point, it's an accusation. Because what's happening, with an accusation like this now, where, certain politicians are talking about taking away certain freedoms and rights, including the freedom of self-defense. Not only that, but if someone is deemed mentally ill and, these files are shared now, it's governmental. Even your doctor has to report this to the government, right? If they're deemed mentally ill, especially if they're deemed paranoid, they're not going to get help when they need it, right? Law enforcement will not help them, right? Stalking has been going on for forever, right? Hacking has been going on since modern technology, since computers, since the internet. I mean, this isn't new, right? And right away, he's being followed, he's being hacked, and they say, oh, he must be paranoia. But these two things happen all the time to a lot of people. Now you can't even speak up about what's happening to you. You can't even report a crime without being deemed mentally ill, and that's without mentally ill, and that's without the other aspect. That's without the organized stalking. That's without the Zerzetzung style warfare. Once we get into talking about gangstalking, well, God help us. Put a big paranoid in our file, we'll never get help from the cops, which means the stalkers, the attackers, can get away with their crimes indefinitely, because they know that anytime we speak up about what's happening to us, all we do is prove even more to the masses that indeed we're mentally ill. If complaining about being followed and hacked is a sign of mental illness, then you complain about being followed and hacked, the masses are going to say, oh, well, clearly he's mentally ill or she's mentally ill. See, he says he's being followed. She says she's being followed. Well, now how do you report crimes? You don't. And that's how criminals get away with their crimes. But two, people who are deemed mentally ill will then be seen as a threat because of the idiots trying to associate the two, mental illness with violence. So when people are seen as a threat, society reacts to them differently. They're treated differently. Okay, they're treated with suspicion. They're treated with, in some cases, hostility. And in some cases, they could even be physically assaulted, right? That goes on for long enough. At some point, they're going to start exhibiting the traits that they were accused of having, right? Agitation, anger, if they're being monitored and followed around, paranoia, I'm being followed, right? By people who supposedly think they're doing something good by monitoring a threat, but what they're actually doing is creating a threat. Their hostility, their mistreatment of this person is going to lead to this person behaving in the way that they expect him to behave. It's a self-fulfilled expectation that they're too damn stupid to understand on any level. But the psychopaths running the sick program understand it. They understand what's happening. You better believe it. They know they can manipulate the masses to behave in this way. Right? And so what happens? In the worst cases, especially, if we add gangstalking to the mix, but even without that, the worst of the population will attack you and attack you and attack you verbally, sometimes physically, right, emotionally. And then when you show signs of anger, they use that against you to say, see, we told you he was violent. See, we told you she was crazy. See, we told you. So they intentionally try to provoke for a negative response just to use that response against you. And then they flip it. It's a satanic reversal, right? They reverse what happened. They say, see, this is why we treated him that way, because he was bad all along. When in reality, it's the other way around. He's responding negatively now because of the initial and negative treatment that was dished out to him for no legitimate reason. That's what happens to people when they're targeted. And right now, there are people on both sides of the political spectrum who are trying to set up a situation where individuals who are mentally ill or those who are just accused of mental illness will be targeted in that manner, thus creating a self-fulfilled expectation on their part, or on the part of those who are too stupid to understand what a self-fulfilled expectation is. Then we get to the point of now enter gangstalking, right? That's meant to literally drive someone crazy. What happens when you're a target of gangstalking or organized stalking? You're followed around, and the people following you want you to know you're being followed. They'll flip their camera up at you and they'll flash it in some cases if they know that nobody else is watching. Or they'll look at you, then look back at their camera, smirk, look at you again, look back at their camera, smirk again, text something, then look back at you. They're letting you know that they're following you, and this happens all day long wherever you go. Sometimes people will come by and they'll make a certain comment that references something you said or did in private where no one else should have been able to hear. This is why gangstalkers say, hey, I think my computer is hacked. I said this. How did someone hear me? Did they hack my microphone? How did they see me? Did they hack my camera? And now that's legitimate. That can happen to even to people who aren't targets of gangstalking. But for targets of gangstalking, it really does happen all the time. It's meant to create paranoia, and the psychos running this program know that. You're being hunted, you're being stalked, you have nowhere to go in private, someone has invaded your home, they can see you and hear you in private, right? They'll come into your home and open a window or move things around just to show you have no safe place. But then when you try to report what's happening, you're called mentally ill and paranoid because people don't believe that such a crime is happening. And then, of course, there are the idiot lackeys who do follow you around. They're told to follow you. They're told to monitor you. In some cases, they're told to make sure that you're aware that you're being followed, right? They're told to make certain comments. They're told to make certain gestures and, whatever, right? And then, when it comes out that you're being called mentally ill for reporting that these things are happening, they accept that diagnosis, even though they know that the very thing you're being accused of mental illness for speaking out about is actually happening because they're involved in it. But they are so stupid, they still say, oh yeah, see, he's mentally ill. For what? For speaking about something that you know is happening because you're doing it? But they reverse it. Any lie they're told, by the psychopaths who hire them, they will accept because they want to believe the lies, because they need to justify what they've done, what they're doing, and what they plan on continuing to do, because they're getting paid, because this gives them, they're just primitive. They love being in a group, gathered together against against a common enemy. And of course, because they're a bunch of pathetic cowards, against a common enemy that they don't really believe can ever fight back. Even if the target does start threatening and start swinging back, these idiots don't believe that the target can do anything. They have the target outnumbered, outgeared, out-resourced. Okay, they don't believe the target can actually do anything to them, so it's a coward's war. They get all the thrill of the hunt without any real threat to themselves, until the target snaps and goes on a shooting spree, which doesn't happen often. It doesn't. Given how many people are targeted with this sick type of warfare, it rarely happens, but sometimes I guess people can be pushed too far. And then, of course, they try to explain what's happening, and they're called mentally ill. And here we go, right? They're discredited. Anyone else who might speak up about being followed and stalked is discredited immediately before they say anything, and then they become afraid to say anything, because if they try to, then they'll be labeled as a potential threat. And also people who are actually mentally ill are now stigmatized because these idiots in really the mainstream media too, they're connecting violence, extreme acts of violence, to mental illness, stigmatize the people who actually have mental illness, while at the same time saying, oh, there's no stigma around being mentally ill. Call for help. Get help if you need it. No. This is insanity. This is insanity. But the whole Gangstalking program, it's meant to, first and foremost, drive people legitimately crazy. It's meant to drive them into a complete breakdown. But even if they don't break down and fall into absolute insanity, it's meant to make them appear insane. Now, you can't say you're being followed without having someone say, you're crazy. But stalking isn't new. So, hacking isn't new. Who wants to silence victims of this? Oh, the criminals do. The criminals do. The psychopaths who are running this program, who are controlling everything, they want to create a society where people just shut up and take quietly any level of abuse. And that's what they're trying to do. First of all, by demonizing those who speak up, by labeling them with, calling them mentally ill, so that they'll be completely discredited. And that's the least of it. At the least, they'll be discredited. At the worst, they'll be institutionalized. Or they'll lose their freedom, they'll lose certain rights, right? That's what happened during, in East Germany when communism was ruling over them. They, the Stasi waged a warfare that was called Zersetzung, total decomposition of a person on every level. They were hunted, they were stalked, they were slandered to everyone they could possibly encounter. They were spied on. Their homes were invaded and things were moved around to try to make them seem crazy. When they reported what was happening, they were called crazy. They were institutionalized. Of course, now we know that it really happened. But back then they weren't believed, just as the victims of MK Ultra weren't believed, just as the victims of COINTELPRO weren't believed, just as the victims of Tuskegee weren't believed. And yet we have people today pulling the same crap as they've always done, and the masses, as always, don't believe us when we talk about what's happening. Here we go again. And it's getting worse, and it's going to keep getting worse, folks. You know what this is all leading to? Even when you complain, when someone who's been through serious trauma shows signs of trauma, they're called weak, aren't they? They're in some cases they're blamed for their own victimization. They're abused, they're blamed for the abuse. If they can't just pretend to be happy through the most extreme abuse, they're blamed for it, for not just being able to be happy in even the most agonizing situation. So all of this propaganda, and it's happening on both sides of the political spectrum, it's meant to silence humanity, so that the government, whoever's running things, can get away with abuse, severe abuse, and expect the population to just shut up about it, to be quiet, to not complain, to not say anything. Okay, the only people who want that are abusers. They're doing everything they can to silence victims. They use ad hominems, they use character attacks, it's horrible. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. You know, the total destruction of an individual on any level, you know, socially, physically, psychologically, emotionally, the complete and total invasion of their lives. This is the sickest, most perverse type of warfare. And when the target snaps, and it's intended for the target to snap, you know, even the lackeys who aren't running things, even they blame the target. Oh, see, he was such a bad person. She was such a terrible person. Well, anyone being put through this type of warfare is going to start exhibiting signs of trauma. And from their anger and yeah, violence at some point, that's what the rulers want. Because guess what? The end to all this is that they use these acts of violence to take away more freedom and rights from the American population. And that includes the right to self-defense. More gun control laws, more red flag laws. Well, who gets targeted by the red flag laws? It's not the real psychopaths, the truly sadistic stalkers who, you know, who wage covert warfare to obliterate people's lives. Okay? They appear to be, you know, well-adjusted members of society. No, it's their victims who end up being red flagged for breaking down, for showing any sign of trauma, because it becomes impossible to simply not flinch when you're being abused that badly. It's not just physical, it's psychological, it's emotional, it is perverse. At some point, they're going to start showing signs of trauma, and then they're going to be red flagged. So then they lose even their right to defend themselves. You know, it's kind of like, I don't even know how to how to describe it. It's we're in trouble, folks. We're in a lot of trouble. We're in a lot of trouble. You know, and when the masses are so willing to go along with this and believe any lies that they're told, you know, they're why this is happening. There are always going to be a few evil people in society who try to fuck things up and create destruction. If the population at large did not allow it to happen, refused to go along with it, it couldn't happen, right? So the organizer of this sick program will say to someone or to the population, you know, they'll say, hey, this person is mentally ill and a potential threat, right? He believes he's being followed around. So go ahead and follow him around and make sure he knows you're following him around. It might help prevent an outburst. Really? Is anyone that stupid? The answer to that is yes. Yes. Okay. So what happens? The target, he knows he's being followed around, right? And so he starts telling people that he's being followed. And these idiot lackeys who are actually following him, they say, oh, he really is mentally ill. He thinks he's being followed. Did you get that, folks? I mean, yes, they are that stupid. We're in trouble, folks. We're in a lot of trouble. Anyway, this is only part of setting someone up for total destruction. This is what happens when you piss off the king breakers. Well, the kingmakers, the king breakers are the same people. They'll build someone up, or they'll tear them down. They can just, I mean, if they like you, they will make, they will just, your life will be great, right? They'll help you in every way. They'll set a safety net for you if you fall, and they'll make sure you don't fall. But if they see you as a threat to their agenda, to their power, they destroy. Everything you say will be twisted against you. Everything you do will be twisted against you. Your character, everything, even things that they would ignore or even praise in other people, they'll condemn in you. even online, the comment after comment after comment, negative, horrible, twisting everything into something bad. Whereas for their allies, they'll do the opposite. One positive comment after another. I really need to make that video, don't I? I will. Anyway, I wanted to get this out there. It's going to be a lot harder now to speak up about this type of warfare, because now people who speak up about it are being called mentally ill, and this level of this type of mental illness then is also being connected with potential violence, mass violence. This is what they're setting up. And to the people who were hired to follow others around and make certain comments, first of all, the comments you make, you don't know what they actually mean. Okay, you could be repeating something the target said in private at home. So you're showing him or her that he or she is being listened to even in private. This is why he gets so upset. Okay, this is not benign. Idiots. 2, if you know that someone is going to be deemed mentally ill for complaining that something is happening, when you know that thing is happening because you're doing it, how stupid can you be to assume you're working for the good guys when you're trying to set someone up for a false diagnosis? You need to speak up and tell the truth. If you have been involved in this, tell the truth. Because what happens is, first it's denied, right? Oh, we're not doing anything. We're not following anyone. And when you can no longer deny it, then you'll justify it by, oh, well, for somehow he deserved it. Somehow she deserved it, right? Just trying to keep people safe. But even when you admit that you're doing it, you still refuse to admit that the target was not mentally ill for complaining about something that you just admitted is happening. But you still want to call him mentally ill for claiming he was being followed. Remember, the first accusation of mental illness was he's mentally ill and paranoid because he believes he's being followed. Well, he is being followed. Of course, they're going to twist it again and say, well, now he's only being followed because he's acting out and he believed he was being followed and therefore he was a potential threat. They're going to twist and twist and twist, and you need to stop now. You need to come out with it, report them, and you have evidence. You have the texts, you have the emails, you have phone calls you can record. If you know someone is being falsely labeled with mental illness for speaking out against something that you know damn well is happening because you've been involved in it, and you don't speak up, you are a criminal. There's no longer any notion that you could be innocent. At first, maybe you were lied to. You were told the person was a threat, so you got involved in this. But once you're made aware of the truth and you continue doing it, you are guilty. You need to speak up. Tell the truth. Come out with this. If you've been involved in following someone around, tracking, monitoring, making certain comments to them, making certain gestures around them, you need to tell the truth. Because they're being accused of mental illness for complaining about those things. And if you're setting someone up for a false accusation or a false diagnosis, you know you're not working for the good guys. The good guys aren't going to set people up for a false diagnosis. Think. Anyway, I'm going to cut this short. I keep saying I'm going to make that video about the kingmakers and kingbreakers, and I'm going to, I promise. Hopefully it'll be the next one unless something else happens that I have to post. Peace.